Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Well, with the No Kings marches and rallies that occurred this past weekend right across North America, celebrities got involved. Celebrities were vocal about this. Are you okay with that? Is it the right thing to do? I guess the way you answer that depends to a certain extent on what they're saying about your political ideology. Let's get into that on the podcast today, and specifically to do with the No Kings rally. One person who has been very vocal in his opposition to Donald Trump for a long, long time now is actor Robert De Niro, who, by the way, a New Yorker, just like Trump was, although he likes to consider himself a Floridian now. That's because he got booted out of New York. But anyway, De Niro has been very vocal ever since Trump decided he wanted to kind of get into politics. As a matter of fact, if you want to go back far enough, you can find that De Niro had some rather pointed criticisms of Donald Trump when he was still businessman Donald Trump, because the stories of real estate shady dealings and so many other things with Trump the businessman were rampant in those days. And De Niro, I guess, is one of these guys that does not suffer fools. Well, Trump seems to be the ultimate fool, so I can understand De Niro's frustration here. During an appearance some years ago now on Who's Talking with Chris Wallace in 2024, De Niro said that he never wanted anything to do with Donald Trump in all the years that he'd known him. And I guess, at various times in New York especially, their paths might cross at charity functions, whatever the case might be, even when he was a businessman. His quote then was that he's a jerk, he's an idiot. He said, "Who wants to meet a clown like that?" Pretty pointed observations. And I know a lot of people on the right, the political right, were pretty upset with De Niro's comments. Mind you, you could simply come back and say, well, if the shoe fits. But he's maintained, and maybe this is a very apt analogy because of some of the characters that De Niro has played in his vast canon of work, of course, as a brilliant actor in our time. He says Donald Trump thinks he's a gangster. He says he does everything like a gangster.
Do you really worry that if he were to win again, and I'm not saying this like it's such a far-fetched notion, if he were to win again, that he would not give up power?
He won't. He won't. He even said it. He's never going to give it up. And anybody who deludes themselves in thinking that he is, shame on you.
You have compared the Trump family to a gangster family, which is something coming from you. What do you mean?
Well, because he thinks he's a gangster. He does everything like a gangster. I don't think that gangsters in that world would think much of him, because there's honor among thieves. There's honor in anything. If you don't keep your word and do the right thing with people, no matter what profession you're in, you are going to get ostracized. And in that world, it's a little harder.
De Niro went on to say, he says, "I don't think that gangsters in that world would think much of a guy like him. I mean, if you don't keep your word and do the right thing with people, no matter what profession you're in, gangster or otherwise, you're not going to get much respect and you're going to be ostracized." Well, that's happened to Donald Trump. And we've seen that happen to Donald Trump. That this is a guy with a very thin skin. He wants people to gravitate to him. He wants people to bow down to him. And I can understand people like De Niro and so many others simply can't tolerate that sort of behavior. That's not the sort of behavior that our political leaders should be exhibiting, especially a guy like this who doesn't seem to have a much of a handle on anything else that's going on, too. It's all about celebrity for Donald Trump and always has been. And the old idea about don't kid a kidder, when you're dealing with celebrities, and there's a long list of them. Now, De Niro comes to mind, certainly, because of his comments more recently. But other people in the show business era and avenues and entertainment industry together have made those comments. And I don't have a problem with that. And frankly, nobody else does either. The ones who criticized De Niro or Jane Fonda or John Cusack or any number of other people. Pedro Pascal was at the rallies also and was very active on social media saying protect democracy. That may ruffle some people's feathers, but those were people that are probably just as comfortable when a Kid Rock or John Voight or Mel Gibson or somebody like that who are chumming with Donald Trump would make their comments. That's okay as far as they're concerned. They just don't want anybody speaking out against him. Well, I was going to say in a democracy, and I'm not so sure that the Americans still have a democracy now. They don't seem to understand that this is eroding almost on a daily basis here. But in a democracy, you've got to allow for free speech, and that means criticism of people in public office. Trump doesn't tolerate that. Trump just wants people to tell him how wonderful he is, how great he is, which basically means they're going to have to lie because neither one of those things are true. But people that speak truth, like a De Niro and so many other people, I think need to have that platform. And the fact that they use their celebrity, their position, to get those feelings across and to state those opinions, I think is actually beneficial to the dialogue that needs to happen in democracies. De Niro is standing up not for the political ideology, he's standing up for decency and people holding public office that need to be held to a higher standard. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's the sort of thing that we need more of. We need more people to speak up. When we see things happening and we see a democracy eroding and an authoritarian government taking a strong grip on what's happening to the United States, reminded of the idea that the best way for these things to happen and the best way for totalitarian governments and fascist governments to take hold is for good people to say and do nothing. Well, De Niro is one of those people that's not going to say, hey, I didn't do my part. Standing on the sidelines or being afraid of the ramifications is a gutless enterprise, and it's a gutless way of handling a bully like Donald Trump is. You know, I was mentioning on one of the previous podcasts, when you look at some of the political dynamic that's going on, especially now, there's another shutdown, of course, which means an awful lot of people aren't getting paid. That's just, the way that their system works between the houses of Congress and the president, and it's a mess, and it always seems to be when Trump is in the White House, sadly. But Mike Johnson is now the Speaker of the House, the House of Representatives. And he's a spineless little amoeba. And you can just see anytime he's in the same room with Donald Trump, he cowers. And you read body language next time. He's not a man who has much self-confidence, clearly, and he's clearly intimidated and scared of Donald Trump. And I can understand to a certain extent why, because Trump is a bully. Trump has already gone after people that have been contrary to his opinions on so many issues, especially other politicians, making sure they don't get the nomination in the next election, any number of different things, tools that he uses, or I shouldn't say tools that he uses, but tools that he will abuse to try to get his way. And for people that have faith in democracy and believe in democracy, and believe in fairness, that's got to rankle them. And that's why I think De Niro is so outspoken about this. This is not a guy who's just spewing phrases and quick one-liners. This is a guy De Niro, that is, who's quite passionate about this and quite upset every time he's on. He was on MSNBC again this past weekend, talking on one of the panel shows there. And it's pretty clear that this is coming from the heart as far as he's concerned, that he can't stand the fact that a guy like Donald Trump actually, first of all, got to power, and second of all, is probably not going to relinquish that power. The Constitution of the United States suggests that you can't serve more than 2 terms as president. And Trump has already made noises like he's going to ask for a 3rd term. I know it's not supposed to happen. It's only happened once before with FDR, just around the time of the end of World War II. But Trump is already laying the groundwork for this. He's already talking about, national emergencies and, the fate of the nation, the fate of the world, and all these other issues that would justify him simply hanging on to power. And the problem that De Niro sees, and he's been pretty vocal about this, is that once he starts to lay that groundwork and his sycophants simply fall in line, nobody's going to stand up to him. And so, what shouldn't happen and couldn't happen all of a sudden becomes something that will happen simply because nobody wants to do anything about it. You have to stand up to a bully. That's really the takeaway here. And De Niro and others of his ilk are doing that, whether they're show business types or anything else. And it bothers me terribly because the kind of individual that Donald Trump is. And that some people that are sucking up to him on a daily basis, other celebrities, movie stars, whatever they might be, athletes, he goes to the PGA Tour there, and oh my God, the people that are fawning over him. And I can understand to a certain extent. Most of them, a lot of them, whether it's Tiger Woods or even Rory McIlroy, who's obviously an Irishman, but I mean, they all have properties down in Florida, so they're down in that neck of the woods. Dustin Johnson comes to mind too. And they're all millionaires. They make a ton of money. playing a game that, well, Trump's not very good at, but, so there's that commonality. And some people just like to be seen with people that are famous. So these people, whatever their political ideology is, they worship at the foot of Donald Trump, and he just eats it up. And it bothers me, and I know it bothers many other people to see that sort of behavior. And, you're known by the company you keep. That's really what it comes down to. I mentioned Dustin Johnson a second ago. Of course, his father-in-law is Wayne Gretzky, and we've talked about Gretzky in the past, about his affiliation with Trump. I know they're sort of neighbors down at Mar-a-Lago, but apparently Gretzky's been there an awful lot. He's been to some of the rallies. So, you kind of get an idea of the political stripe that Gretzky has become. And, that's I guess, a choice that he has to make. But as we've talked about, there are consequences to that. I mean, I have little respect for Wayne Gretzky for a whole lot of reasons, but especially because of the political choices that he's made here. You have to have the backbone. You have to have the courage to stand up to people like Donald Trump and bullies like Donald Trump. And sadly, there aren't too many people in the United States that really want to do that anymore. And that's having a terribly negative impact on the political dynamic. So you go back to a guy like De Niro, who's basically very critical of not just Trump, but of the MAGA movement altogether. As he mentioned on the MSNBC show that he appeared on Sunday, I think it was, he says, Trump being bad enough, but he says, I can't understand how members of Trump's cabinet can live with themselves. And again, it goes back to my comment about how these people just are crawling over each other to try to get to Trump. They have shown some cabinet meetings that Trump has been a part of. And it's the great big long conference table, of course. And there's Trump sitting in the middle, and his Rubio guy and Ludnick and a few of the others are right there. And it really becomes a love-in. Well, they don't talk business, and I understand that there's some PR stuff in front of the cameras, etc. But person after person after person in his quote-unquote cabinet simply take 5 minutes of valuable time and talk about what a wonderful president Trump is, what a great man he is, how he's doing what he can to try to make America great again, and on and on. All the usual talking points that I guess they've all been given. It's the Stepford politicians, really, is what it comes down to. That they just automatically just fall into rhetoric that Trump has already pre-approved, and this is what they spew, and he just eats it up. That's what he wants to hear. And I know there are people, maybe not around that cabinet table, but there are people within the Republican Party and certainly within the Congress and the Senate who I know, I'd like to think anyway, don't buy all this crap, but they're afraid to speak up. And therein lies the problem. I made reference a couple of podcasts ago to the comparators that a lot of people like to make between the Trump situation and Richard Nixon, who was a piece of work in and of himself. But what changed with Nixon, eventually forced him to resign, as we talked about during the podcast, was some of the leading Republicans just said enough is enough. We're not taking this crap anymore. Howard Baker and Lowell Weicker and a couple of the other Republicans that were on the Watergate Committee had been supportive and defensive of Nixon all the way along. But as the evidence mounted and it became crystal clear that he was orchestrating this whole thing, that they had it on tape, they went to the White House. A very famous, chronology of this. Woodward and Bernstein wrote about this. They went to the White House and said, Mr. President, we're asking you to resign. We will not support you anymore. You have crossed the line. You've lied to us about it. And we're simply, for the integrity of the United States and the Constitution, demanding that you step aside. And he did. As much of a crook as Nixon was, he saw the writing on the wall. Well, there's nobody that's got the courage to do that to Donald Trump. Nobody wants to stand up to him because they're afraid. He's afraid he's going to yell at them, afraid he might throw ketchup against the wall like he did after the January 6th debates that were going on then. They're afraid of his temper. And I understand it's quite a violent temper. We don't see a lot of it on camera, but it's been reported that Trump can get very, very volatile. And I guess, to people like little Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker of the House, they get scared of that. Well, if you're intimidated by that, and if you're afraid to do what needs to be done because of something like that, you shouldn't be in that role in any way, shape, or form. You shouldn't even be seeking or certainly be given elected office. It takes courage, and it takes vision, and it takes some I think, an understanding of not only the circumstances, but the ramifications of doing things or not doing things to make a country great. And the Americans have fallen off considerably. So I can understand people like De Niro and so many other people in show business and sports, wherever the case might be, that feel as if it's absolutely necessary to speak up about what's happening here because they see what's happening to their country. They see a bully in the White House. I mean, there are so many different examples that we could talk about here. I mean, as we're doing this podcast today, I'm looking at the news this morning, and they're tearing down part of the White House to build a freaking ballroom that he's promised each other. They're tearing down part of the East Wing. That's not his house. That belongs to the American people. Donald Trump just thinks that everything is his. It's to do with it as he will. The White House belongs to the American people, and the president, whether it's Trump or whomever it might be, lives there at the pleasure of the American people. And when they're finished with that president, he gets out of there, or she gets out of there, and they move on to the next president, whoever that might be. It's not his to simply do whatever the heck he wants. And he's already done this. He's tearing down the East Wing because he wants a ballroom, because it's all about him, all about extravagance. The Rose Garden, which has been a tradition for years and years and years of the White House, is paved over now. It looks like the patio at a Kelsey's instead of being part of the White House and the tradition that goes with that. This is what he's doing, and those are just the symbols of the American political system. I mean, tearing down the White House itself and doing what he's doing there is kind of a metaphor for what he's doing to the country at large. And it's about time that people like De Niro, who's always been a critic, and others do speak up about this. So keep doing it, De Niro. Keep doing it, others. And please, please, please be vocal. I don't know that it's going to do a whole lot of good in the short term, but eventually you'd like to think that message, that truth is going to be something that's going to resonate and hopefully swing some people to say, okay, we got to do something about this. And sadly, as we do this podcast today, and as frustrated as I am on this side of the border, I look at people like De Niro and so many others that are doubly frustrated because that's their country. That's the country that they love. And whether it's New York City where De Niro grew up or whether it's the greater picture of Washington and the implications nationally to this, they're fed up. And they can't stand somebody like Trump, the narcissist in charge, who's simply tearing their country apart politically, economically, and socially. And I can understand their pain, and I can understand their outrage. And we need to listen to that outrage, and the American people need to do something about it. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Hit that notification bell if you're on YouTube, and make sure you spread the word on this, okay? Thanks to all the people that are jumping on to subscribe. We do appreciate your support on this as we continue to do the work here on the podcast, and look forward to your contributions and your input back and forth on all of these items, too. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work doing the production on this. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.